Despite all efforts, the reality of the COVID-19 lockdown is that many students will have had to drop out of their courses and many won't return. Those who already started a financial or social social disadvantage will be the hardest hit. Dr. Jacqueline Batchelor is a senior lecturer in mobile learning at the University of Johannesburg. She joins me now for more on this. Dr. Jacqueline, good evening and thank you so much for your time. Interesting that when one speaks to students about their experience, in particular of, distant learning, because that's what COVID-19 has really done, they're having a difficult experience with, being able to relate with the content that they're given and even keep up with their schoolwork.
Thank you very much, Kathy. It's an interesting observation that you make. We're finding that some students find it difficult. Other students are really thriving in this environment. We are very interested in the throughput rate and how the students are engaging with the content as well as with each other during this time. And the data actually supports the notion that it's been largely positive. We identify students that are at risk prior to lockdown, that remain vulnerable during lockdown, and we've reached out to those students. We've tried to get them back into the institutions of higher learning. And so we recognize that it is a difficult challenge for everyone.
How much of one's vulnerability going into COVID-19 determines whether or not a student is able to survive during this period? So if you're from a family where you live in an area where the electricity supply is less consistent than it is elsewhere, where you don't have access to Wi-Fi, where maybe you didn't have a laptop going into this crisis?
So what we're finding is students that were vulnerable prior to lockdown, those vulnerabilities are amplified post-lockdown. What we're finding is that the rurality or the geographical isolation of students don't necessarily impact too negatively on their studies. And maybe the reason why is because students find themselves very resilient. They come up with innovative solutions in consultation with each other and their lecturers. So we're finding that, as we build new knowledge, as we go forward in this crisis, it is actually a collective effort in this academic project that we want to. We recognize that there are vulnerabilities, and we're trying really hard as a collective, as a higher educational industry, to address those disparities in the system. And we recognize that some universities are harder hit and they have more vulnerabilities where they are given the context. It's very difficult to apply a single solution to all of them.
Do we understand or know yet what the dropout rate is, if there has been a significant dropout rate as yet?
I cannot speak for all the universities, but what I can attest to is in our institution, we've actually seen a slight increase in the throughput rate, which has been really surprising for us. And that can be attributed to the real innovative solutions that have emerged through this crisis. We're finding that there's increased alternative channels of communication and engagement with the content. We are finding that things are highly contextualized, and there's been a deep interrogation in terms of the assessment to make sure that it is still just and fair to accommodate for all of these barriers to entry that our students are experiencing.
The reality, though, is that not all students are going to be able to make it through the year. And, one cannot, of course, take away from the experience of the individual challenges that a student may experience. So what then happens going into next year? How is the issue of having to repeat a grade going to be taken on? Are universities going to have the same view that they've traditionally held?
No, I think that view is highly influenced by our context at the moment. So it's not business as usual going forward. What we're trying to do is we're trying to minimize the hardship of the students, because we recognize some of them will really have challenges to engage at the level that they did prior to lockdown. So we are pushing all sorts of support their way in terms of tutor support, in terms of academic support, and we're trying to prevent that academic exclusion from happening at all. We're also looking at blockages in the program, such as prerequisites and co-requisites, where they might have limited their progression into a year going forward. So from an institutional perspective, we are really interrogating our own policies and our own standards and how we apply the academic exclusion processes going forward. So we are trying to address these as a case-by-case basis for these students, but we're trying to prevent getting to that point.